And then that's it. That's Scream 1.
All right, we've been rather positive, and I'll hope you allow me to be at least a little bit negative here. So,
Sure.
I mentioned the opening scene is just like perfect. The rest of the movie never quite gets up to that level, and that's kind of a shame. Although the climax is good, like a lot of the stuff going on in the house. It's also interesting to note that the climax is like a third of the movie. Like they get to that, this is about a 2 hour movie. They get to that house probably an hour and 15 minutes in, right? I mean, that's a big portion of the movie.
Yes.
But as for the problems, I'll put the problems in quotes, and I'll start off first by a complete nitpick. This is just my personal taste when it comes to slasher movies. This movie is too classy. The slasher genre, as I talked last episode about Friday the 13th, the final chapter, the slasher genre is, in my eyes, a genre primarily of sleaze. I like the 80s ones. I like some of the early, the 70s ones before it was a full-on movement. Because those are sleazy, exploitation-y films. A lot of nudity, a lot of violence. This movie, no nudity. There's a little bit of sex, but there's no nudity. Listen, I'm not saying the movie's worse because there's no nudity. I'm just saying my personal
You're saying you
preference.
want to see Sydney's titties.
It's Nev Campbell. I've seen Wild Things. I'm all for that. But Wild Things coming up later this season, by the way. But I don't... This is completely a personal preference thing. I like horror movies, slasher movies that embrace the sleaze of the subject matter. This tries to take some of the things that are in those movies and do something a little bit more highbrow. We have the virgin character, again, not literally a virgin, but someone who's abstaining from sex, and then she finally has sex, and the whole, like, once she has sex, then suddenly she's, like, about to die, and, like, literally right after she has sex, her boyfriend dies, except obviously he doesn't die. But, like, we even get the, like, when they're, because it's intercut with them watching Halloween and with the PJ Souls scene, it's like Randy's like, oh, here comes the obligatory tit shot, and then it's like Nev Campbell taking off her bra, but you don't see anything, and it's like, was this how it was supposed to be? I just feel like I just feel like it was set up as something different than it was. But so no, that's like a minor thing, and you don't even have to engage in that part of my complaint because it's honestly not a fully formed one. The bigger issues I have with this movie is the meta aspect of it. I don't actually feel like the movie does anything that interesting with that. And I think when people talk about this movie, they talk about like, oh, meta horror, like this is the first horror movie where like the characters in it have seen horror movies, so it's like you can more easily relate to them. And I'm not going to be one of those guys that goes, actually, Return of the Living Dead, it has some meta horror aspects, or Friday the 13th Part 6. Like, I don't care if it's the first or not. This clearly is more fully a meta horror than some of those earlier movies. But I feel like that's just an aspect of the story, and it doesn't enhance it a whole lot. Like, maybe it makes the characters a little bit more relatable, i.e. Randy. I think it works as like that's Randy's character, but I don't feel like it enhances the actual story. That's really one of my biggest issues with it. And I also think, just in general, in the meta horror aspect of this it plays a part. But Scream as a movie, as a series, is, at least in theory, a slasher movie that delves more into realism than other slasher movies, i.e. there's no unkillable Michael Myers or supernatural Freddy. And the fact that the characters have seen horror movies is part of this, because in real life, if we were to be in a slasher situation, we have seen slasher movies. But I don't think the film does much with this. I think it creates a world that's easier to enter, to follow, and relate with the characters, but then at the end of the day, it still gets rather exaggerated with the killers, and it kind of loses that realism aspect. Speaking of realism, you like that Ghostface is clumsy. You
I
like that
love it.
Ghostface falls down.
He's human.
I know, but it's also like almost like too goofy. I don't know. I guess I appreciate the attempt at realism, but I also feel like it's somewhat half-baked. I feel like it doesn't hit that note in a way that really satisfies. And I suppose the more that I think of this is somewhat of a half-baked complaint as well. I think my biggest complaint is that the meta aspects don't really do much beyond aesthetics. They don't really do much beyond, oh, that's kind of a fun joke or a fun gag. It's fun that Jamie Kennedy is looking at the television and saying, look out, Jamie, he's right behind you. It doesn't enhance the story. It doesn't ultimately elevate the film. And that's me. Feel free to step in and argue with any of those points because, again, reminder, I do like this movie. Just wanted to touch on these negative things because I feel like most people don't talk about these things as if they're negatives. And you know what? I'm going to correct myself. They're not negatives. They're just not necessarily positives. How about that?
I love meta shit. I think it's great. I think it's very of its time. I think people finally got smart enough without being too smart. I think people are too smart now. I think the 90s, 2000s
when you say people, do you mean movie viewers? Do you mean movie characters?
Audiences and characters, yeah. I think most films today are just stupid and jokes are really bad. They just can't cook them up like that anymore. This is pre-internet.
It is pre/very early internet. She does call the cops from the internet.
People think they're so smart nowadays because of the internet. The dumbest people think they're smart. It's annoying.
I know. Listen, you and I both teach high school. We get this. But one thing I was going to say, there are a couple jokes in this movie. They're both from Tatum that are so dumb. I hate them. There's this one where she's talking to Nev Campbell and she's like, "Oh, calm down, Sid. You sound like you're in some Wes Carpenter flick." And it's like, you know what? Fuck you. If you know enough to know that there's a horror film director named Wes and that there's a horror film director named Carpenter, you're going to get the names right. And then later on, she says, when she's in the garage, she says something about like, "What is this? I spit on your garage." And it's like, okay, I thought Randy was the horror guy. It's just like everyone, because I Spit on Your Grave is like it's not an obscure movie, but it's not like it's like a movie that a random high school girl would be familiar with. I don't know. It was a Jeopardy response a few weeks ago, so that's worth noting, but I don't know. These minor complaints, I'm just like, there's a few jokes that are just too much for me, and those are some of them. I think the Wes Craven cameo as Fred is a bit much, and there's a few other things that it's just like, you know. Although I will say, despite all those jokes, I think the horror scenes still take themselves very seriously, and I appreciate that. And I think some of the Scream sequels don't quite hit that balance. Like, that opening scene is terrifying. A lot of the stuff in the climax is terrifying. That's great. I appreciate not letting the comedy overtake the horror.
Yeah, there's an uneven tone of later ones, but they're still pretty brutal. It's always brutal deaths.
What are your thoughts on Scream?
I think it's just very real, and I think, like, I love that the killers are fucking human and goofy, but not, like, absurdist, like, monster kind of human, like Texas Chainsaw, or, like, some crazy dream shit, or Michael Myers, who's, like, human, but, like, pure evil, allegedly, and, like, can't die no matter what the fuck you do to him.
Or whether he's pure evil or not, he's immortal.
Like, the Scream killers, like, these motherfuckers, some of them wear, like, bulletproof vests because they're fucking regular ass people. And, you know, Sydney, who's just like some skinny little John, dude, like, she's not a big by any means person. Or like Gale in these movie series, like, they fucking fight Ghostface, and like they could like win or incapacitate or get away. And it's just like, this is just how this kind of shit would go down.
Yeah. No, and Sydney as a character is awesome. Nev Campbell, again, is great in this movie, but as like a character, you really appreciate her being smart. And, you know, most people will point to she shoots Billy before he really has a chance to come back. But, like, you know, just other things too, like you mentioned, getting away when Billy's distracted by Gale. That's something you don't always see in horror movies.
Yeah, and as a big simulation theory guy, I just love the meta and talking about them as being in the movie and the reality, the distortion of reality, and I fucking just love it, dude.
Okay. You know what bothers me a little bit about meta aspects, not just of Scream, but of just things of certain media, right? You know, I'm a big literature guy.
Yes.
I've read almost every Shakespeare play. Frequently in Shakespeare plays, namely Hamlet and A Midsummer Night's Dream, there is a play within a play. It always bothered me. Now, and I love the play within a play in Hamlet because it serves a story purpose, and I love the play within A Midsummer Night's Dream. It doesn't serve a story purpose, but it's hilarious. However, when people, i.e. professors, and they get students talking about it, when we talk about plays within plays, the conversation usually ends with, it's meta. It should start with it's meta, but here it ends with it's meta, and it's like, okay, what purpose does this serve? Well, I don't know. That's kind of the complaint I have about the meta-ness in Scream. It's like, it's there. I just don't think it serves that much of a purpose. And I'm not saying the Shakespeare meta stuff doesn't. I'm just saying most people don't dig deeper to see what the purpose is. And maybe that's the case with Scream. Maybe I haven't dug deep enough to see what the purpose is, but I'm going to go on a limb and say that's not the case because I've probably seen this movie a dozen times, and I don't know.
Just look harder.
Listen, I've tried. Well, what can you tell me? What's the meaning? What's the point?
I think it's just like
an easier way to relate to the characters.
Yeah, I think it's just supposed to be fun and lighthearted because the story itself is so incredibly dark and depressing. Like, you don't get a lot of trauma.
That's good. That's something. That's fun, and it kind of changes the tone of an otherwise very, very dark thing. That's
I feel like a lot of slasher films don't go with the mom being raped and murdered and mom actually being kind of quote unquote the town slut, whatever.
That's fair. Yeah, let's face it, she's no Sharon Stone.
She is no Sharon Stone.
No, that is all fair, and I agree with that, I should say. But that alone doesn't make this, and I shouldn't say alone, that doesn't like make this a horror masterpiece to me. That makes this a mildly unique horror film that's pretty good, that has one sequence that's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in a horror movie, the opening scene, and has a couple other really good scenes, and I can move on with my life from it. You know, I know you love this movie. A bunch of people love this movie. I saw this as a 4.02 rating on Letterboxd. That is freaking high. That is like Everything Everywhere All at Once high. I mean, it's probably not as high as that. That was probably like a 4.3, but still, that's a really high number. And it's like, you know, I like it. I don't know. I don't get masterpiece from Scream. I get fun movie. I guess that's my biggest takeaway. I feel like, especially as a horror fan, sometimes it feels like I'm in like a minority of one, and that it's like, yeah, Scream's good. Didn't change my perspective on anything. It's like, this is fine. It's good. And I, of course, I'm selling it short. It's a good movie. I just don't see masterpiece.
My good buddy from Chicago has watched Scream 5 times in the last 2 years on Letterboxd.
Okay.
And his first review is 4 stars.
Okay.
And he says, total banger. The meta stuff is a tad overdone, but it would be very easy to argue Scream is a classic.
And I'm not arguing it's not a classic.
The second time he says, also again 4 stars. I think that after the opening scene, it's a bit rough. But once the party starts, it's damn near perfect. Final sequence is like a Coen brother movie, which is the highest praise I can give. I love a movie that loves movies, as do I.
Okay.
Third time, 4.5 stars. This gets better every time.
Getting better, yeah.
This gets better every time. Fourth time, 4.5 stars. It's called Tact, you fuck rag, which is a great line in the movie. And then the 5th time, 5 stars and 1 word, classic.
Okay.
And that is how I feel. I agree with everything he said. It can be rocky. There can be rocky watches of Scream, but when you're in the mood...
I do agree with what your friend said. After the first scene, it gets rocky, but then once they get to the house, it's like a masterpiece. I don't know if I'm going full masterpiece. I do agree that everything between Drew Barrymore, Casey, and Stu's house is okay. I think another thing... I think the killer approaches Sydney too quick. Like, Casey has just died. Casey's the only person dead. And the killer's, like, in Sydney's house. And it's like, okay, this doesn't work because I know she's not going to die. And then the scene in the school is kind of just like, okay, this is kind of just, like, feels like it's thrown in there. I feel like we're just trying to get as many scenes of her being chased by the killer as we can. Those scenes don't work for me, and that's a big part of the reason why that middle chunk is kind of mediocre. But all that stuff works at Stu's house, because at that point, we're towards the end of the movie, something could happen.
Those parts, that middle part, couldn't have been better? Sure.
Yeah, the middle part's not bad. There's good moments there. There's good characters.
The principal kill is great. The scene in the bathroom is great. The silly supermarket Ghostface sighting is just ridiculously goofy.
Oh yeah, he's just like in the reflection briefly.
Yeah, like obviously someone would fucking see that guy.
Yeah, I agree. That's true.
Like that one was just straight up goofy.
Listen, it's a fine movie. I don't love it, and you do, and that's great. We can disagree, and we're not even strongly disagreeing. It's just like, I still like this movie quite a bit. I just, it's no Pieces. I'll always go back to Pieces. Pieces is the greatest slasher movie ever. It embraces its sleaze in a fun, unique, and weird way. But credit to Kevin Williamson, he had a unique vision for a horror film. Credit to Wes Craven. I think Wes Craven's kind of really the reason why it is a horror film. I think early on, before Wes Craven was involved, people were looking at this script from Kevin Williamson, this kind of meta horror script, and they were seeing it as a comedy. I think it's kind of Wes Craven who saw it as like, no, we can make this a horror movie. We can actually make this a legitimate horror movie. And that to me it's not a perfect marriage, but it's a pretty good one.